for students to thrive academically. So the intellectual kind of thriving that we want to see in our students. And this has two elements to it. One is called academic determination, and the other is engaged learning. So when we think about, let me get this going next, academic determination. So our students who are really thriving in their first year are going to be learning how to self-regulate the learning process. In other words, they'll do things like, if I don't understand something, I will ask a question. I'll go back and read it again. So it's this kind of metacognition, this thinking about thinking, is what thriving students do. They also are investing effort. And it's quality of effort, it's not time. So I had, when I taught first year, some of my students said, how come I got a C on this paper and my roommate got an A because I spent twice as much time as she did writing it? That's not fair. Okay? So effort for them is sometimes interpreted as the quantity of time. And it's like, no, it's what are you doing with your time? And some people can process a little faster than others, and it's not the amount of time, it's what are you actually doing? So when students are thriving, they are putting the effort in, but it's good quality effort. They are also good at managing their time and energy. So a lot of times we talk about time management strategies, and Keith may address this as he talks about strengths development, but it's not always about time management, it's more about energy management. You know? And that depending on how you're wired, you're going to manage your energy very differently. But thriving students feel like they have a pretty good balance between what they're investing academically and what they're investing their time in outside of class. And finally, the big ticket item in academic thriving is that these students know what to do with their strengths. Now, in this case, it doesn't mean Clifton StrengthsFinder theme necessarily. It's more like self-efficacy. In other words, I know I have some talents, and I know what I can do well, and I know how to apply that to this challenge that I'm facing academically. Okay? So that's what that element of thriving is about. We feel like one of the most important things for students to understand that's going to help them kind of come to life academically is understanding about a growth mindset, the role of mindset and effort. The U.S. is one of the few countries that believes that smartness is something you either have or don't, or at least you have it to some degree. And when you go to Asian countries, when you go to Europe, you will find there is this implicit understanding that you have to work hard. But in the U.S., even though we say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the way we teach implies that students come into the classroom and they either are going to get it or they don't. And so the way we then approach things too often in class is my job is to transmit information and explain it to you, and you will either get it or not. Rather than saying, no, there's strategies for learning. There's ways of investing effort in certain directions that are going to pay off. Okay? So when we look at mindset, and Carol Dweck at Stanford University is the major researcher who's done this, people tend to be somewhere on this continuum, that you either believe that intelligence is something so basic, you're kind of born with it, and it doesn't change very much through your lifetime. And then at the other end of the continuum is the belief that you can always change how intelligent you are. Right? So a fixed mindset is when you think, hey, I've got it in a certain quantity, and that's not likely to change through my life. And a growth mindset is this, no, it's a fluid process. Your brain changes, and I can learn with the right strategies and the right amount of effort, I can learn just about anything. The key here is how you see effort, because if you believe that you've got this fixed quantity of smartness, then effort is very threatening. Because if I have to try, it means I'm not very smart. And I've had people even say to me, well, you know, she's not that bright, but she's a hard worker. What in the world does that mean? You know? And so when our students have a fixed mindset, then they are not going to put the effort in because they think, well, it just means if I have to try, I'm not very smart, and it's very threatening to their self-esteem. But when students have a growth mindset, their view of effort is very different. It's, hey, this is how you learn. Of course you put the effort in. You can't possibly learn anything without that process. Now the key thing here is that this is a very teachable concept for students. And when they get this, it changes how they spend their time and the quality of their effort in class. But more importantly, your mindset matters. So one of the pieces of research that Carol Dweck did that totally convicted me when I first read it, because I realized what I was doing. And her, the way she looked at this was she assess the mindset of instructors, and she had these at-risk students, underperforming students in class, and when they were with a fixed mindset instructor, their performance remained subpar all through the semester. And at the end of the semester on these independent tests, yep, they were the C students. Okay? But when those same kind of students had an instructor with a growth mindset, they may have started out C students, but by the end of the class, they were matching their peers and in some cases doing better than their peers when they had an instructor with a growth mindset. And I realized what I was doing as an instructor was making judgments the first day of class. And I was kind of pigeonholing, especially after the first quiz or test, if we gave those in class. If I saw a student who failed the first exam or assignment or got a C or something, I realized I was making judgments about what that student would be capable of. And if I don't think a student's capable of things, I treat them differently. What are some ways that I treat students differently if I don't think they've got it?
You don't push them to achieve.
Yeah, I don't push them. I don't push them very hard. So if I don't think you know an answer, maybe I'm calling on people, I come to you and you hesitate, I will move right on. If I think you've got it, what will I do? Wait for me, or help me work it out. That's right. I will stand here and wait. Okay? So the messages that we send to our students are so crucial. And that's an important thing for us to remember as we think about our interactions with students in class. So Ken Bain, if you've ever read his book, What the Best College Teachers Do, that came out in 2004, he said one of the things they all had in common was that their mindset was they went looking for it. They expected students to make a contribution. And they were really good at communicating that to students, of saying, I believe in you. We did a study of at-risk students from a number of different institutions and who had outperformed what anybody thought they would be capable of. And we said, what made the difference for you? And one of the things they told us over and over again is they had a professor who believed in them. And one of my favorite quotes from that study was a student who was describing this professor and said, she believed in me before I believed in myself. And the difference that made, and we found that was even more powerful when students were coming from underprepared or disadvantaged environments, that made all the difference, that somebody believed they were capable of it. So encouraging a growth mindset, one of the things you can do in class is actually teach students about the brain and how it works. And so we have a little YouTube video, and we can send you the link for it to show you a 2-minute and 8-second.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So we did a little experiment with first-year students where we simply showed them this second video and had them think about what that meant for their work as a
My name is Eric.
as a first-year student. And the control group then watched just the first basic information about the brain, weighs this much, etc. And to say, so how's that going to help you as a first-year student? And then we watched their progression over the course of the semester. And so we saw, as Carol Dweck's research has done, that those who have this view of the brain start putting more effort into things and doing better in class, and their grades are different by the end of the semester. So that's why we've taken time to really talk about this now. The more you can share examples and stories of either how you had to practice over and over again, how difficult it was for you to learn something, that's a huge message to them. Or to show them pictures, tell them stories of famous people they identify with and go, do you know how much time LeBron James spends on the practice court, right? Okay, he has some natural talent there, but he practices and practices and practices. And getting that message through that this is normal, everyone should be putting effort in, is an important message for our students. It's also keeping in mind when we give feedback to students, we can be affecting their mindset as well. And so as you think about your opportunities for feedback, whether that's in the moment as you're waiting for a student to answer a question, or if it's on their oral presentation or their papers or whatever, students tell us that, in fact, it's the #1 complaint about our faculty at APU, but we are not alone in that. It's the #1 student complaint of all faculty in the universe, is that we do not get things back on time. So when I started asking students, what do you mean by timely feedback? One of them said, well, let's just say it this way. I'm a senior and I still don't have some papers from my first year seminar. Okay. I think that's too long. Okay. But they come around in focus groups to about 2 weeks. That is what they think is reasonable. But here's the more important principle. It's whenever you tell them you're going to have it back is the far more important piece. And so if you say, I will have this back to you on Monday, then that's when they start getting disappointed, is when, and if you don't ever say, then they'll be bugging you all the time, right? When are you going to have those graded or whatever? So again, it's that communication piece of turning things around to them. And that your feedback is instructive. What do you need to do differently next time? Because again, that sends a message, okay, maybe you didn't do so well on this particular assignment, but you can turn this around. And here are some specific things, specific strategies you need to do. And then the more frequently you can build it into your course. So it's not just, I'm going to give feedback on that resource paper. It's no, where can I give feedback every week to students? That they are getting something from me that tells them how they're doing in the course. All right, Eileen, tell us about our incoming students and what they're thinking about whatever this is.
All right, what this is what percentage of last year's incoming freshmen thought they were very or somewhat strong in critical thinking skills? So they're coming in, what are they thinking? 35% are thinking they're strong or very strong, 50, 65, 70. Huh? They're self-assessed.
They're
Not our assessment.
Not ours.
Skewed results there. Yeah, that was kind of a little thinking. 70
they feel like they're being
65.
evaluated during that.
All right, and critical thinking, they're around the 70. All right, so they think they are. These are our comparable schools. So we appear to have a better sense of our academic abilities than students going to other mid-level selectivity private schools. That's who we're comparing ourselves to. So you can see that they come in with a little bit of a heightened sense of their academic abilities, which maybe in some ways helps us with academic self-efficacy. In the other way, it's difficult because of the disillusionment that happens when they go through and they realize maybe they don't know as much about critical thinking as they did. How about what percentage of AP students believe that they are very strong or somewhat strong in their understanding of national issues? How about on the national level? 31% said they're strong, very strong, all the way down to 69. What are they thinking they know? So we're about mid-range, somewhere we think 45, 52. What's kind of interesting about it is that they only see themselves understanding national issues. So they have a heightened sense of kind of their critical thinking and all that kind of stuff. But when you ask them specifically, what do you know about problems facing your community, national or global, then they realize, wow, they don't really know that much after all. So it's interesting for a lot of the courses that we were reading through the seminar topics and things like that, I think you'll be bumping up against a little bit of this kind of dichotomy. I'm a good thinker, but I don't really know much about these types of things. And then the last one, what percentage of the 2014 believed that they would work on a professor's research project? So coming in, this is what they believed. Their best guess, they thought they would work with a professor. Top and bottom. So this kind of reflects what I thought. I thought, you know, an 18-year-old, that about 22 to 38% might. Yeah, 71% of them believe that they will work on a faculty member's research project. Yeah, that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. Wow. Now, I understood this regularly with your professors because, quite frankly, it's part of our sales pitch, right? That you're going to know the faculty. And I think perhaps the way we're recruiting students in, the messages that we're giving them the message that you're going to have a close relationship with your professor. So I think we're shaping some of those expectations in the messages that we give. But also in that shaping, it also tells you something about which students choose us. When they hear those messages, that appeals to them and they choose us. So they're looking for those kind of relationships from us. But I thought this was interesting to me because not only are they looking for this relationship, which I thought they would say, I did not think that they would say that they want to work on the research projects as an undergrad. Master's, doctoral, yes, not as an undergrad. So you begin to see, this is a fascinating piece though. You take that, I'm going to work with the faculty's research project, but you look at, this is what they think they're academic, that they're going to attain over their lifetime, okay? So if you look at APU against our comparison group, a significant amount are going to think they're only going to get their bachelor's degree as looking at our comparison. Then when you look at PhD, we fall down, we go down from there. So the higher the degree attainment, the less our students believe they're going to get that. But yet they're going to work on our research progresses. And so there's some disconnect, and I think this is probably something that we'll need to continue to work on because this has been a trend that's been with us for quite some time, is that our students don't come in necessarily with the same sense of advanced degrees as our like-minded institutions. Okay? All right, so that gives you a little bit about what they're thinking. So when it comes to academic determination, it takes 4 chapters in, yeah, please.
Oh, just a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Does this have anything to do with having more first-gen students? So dreaming to even get a bachelor's is maybe a bigger deal, or was that controlled in this?
You know, I really would, we could probably get down to that data. It wasn't in the report that was handed to me, but that would be an interesting way to try to control for those levels. Because when you think of our Pell level, and then you put it against this, you would have to wonder if that doesn't affect it at all. But I don't know what the average Pell is for our comparison universities, and that would be kind of the key to know that for their students. But I would think so too, because you know, for a first generation student, a bachelor's degree is a huge accomplishment. But I also think too that the longer they're in the university system, the more then they raise their expectations for who they can become. So, yeah. So speaking of expectations, we'll go into these chapters. Thanks, those are great questions. It covers 4 chapters. Academic determination is really important in momentum. The first one covers things like memory, long-term, short-term memory, and it covers things like sleep and their emotional state. So it's kind of just the facts, ma'am. But the reality of it is that the sleep deprivation that happens during the first semester is really very, very influential on ultimately their ability to take tests, to write good papers, and to succeed academically. But it's an ethos of college that you're going to do all-nighters. But you know, all the studies that have shown that sleep deprivation is more detrimental to your driving than intoxication. And so this idea of all-nighters and things like that, we need to continue to try to push back against, to say, not a good academic strategy, you're getting back. But also in chapter 3 is the growth mindset. So if you did want to refer to it, it's covered in that chapter. 4 and 5 is goal setting and hope theory, so we're going to talk a little bit more about this. In chapter 7, what we found is that there's so many great online resources for academic support. And so for us to duplicate all this kind of took up space that probably wasn't that useful because the students are going to go online, they're going to go real time. But somebody needed to vet those because some of them are horrible and some of them are really good and useful. So Matt Visser did for us this chapter where it is really just a list, a lot of different online resources, but they are the best of the best. So if you're sending students to those, you'll know these have been vetted. We've looked at them closely to make sure that these are good, solid resources. But it's really 4 and 5 that I want to talk to you a little bit more about. This is the idea of goal setting and hope theory. And so I have to go on method saying that my doctoral dissertation has this title called The Effect of Anticipatory Consciousness on college students. Anticipatory consciousness is the way I could talk about hope at University of Texas and get my degree through, okay? But it's actually what I studied was this idea of how do we project ourselves into the future and how does that affect our learning in the moment, in the current state? And so what we found is when they look at this, that hope, students with higher levels of hope outperform low hope individuals on all of these semester grades, graduation grades, and standardized tests. And so their level of hope is a huge determinant of whether they're going to be successful. Even when you control for the pre-existing levels of intelligence and ability. So you control for everything and you come to find out that it's really this idea of hope. Any of those who've worked in nursing in those fields, a lot of research in nursing about the effect of hope on your physical state. This one is my favorite. If you take athletes and you control for natural ability, their athletic ability, those kind of things, their past scores and results. High hope track athletes outperform low hope in track and field events. 56% of the variance on this particular piece. And so you do hear that, even I watch through this lens now, the interviews that they do with athletes at the end, especially in the Olympics, and they're always talking about their goals and setting their goals and their next race and their future, and they have this kind of orientation toward what's the next thing, and they set very high goals because high hope students set high goals. It makes a real difference for them. So what is hope then, now that it's kind of this fuzzy term that we think we have or we don't have? But it simply is that high hope people believe the future will be better than the present, and they have the power to make it so. All right, so it's not wishful thinking, which is I wish I could make an A on this test, but I'm only going to study about 20 minutes. Okay, that's like wishful thinking. That's not what we're talking about. Hope has some real important pieces to it. The first piece of it is goal-directed thinking. So a high hope person has specific goals. They know they can name them. Now, it doesn't necessarily always mean that they have them written down, but if you ask a high hope person what they want to do in 5 years and 10 years, they can tell you specifically what they're going to do. Because the second thing about hope is that hope is connected to the pathways. So it's not just that I can tell you where I want to be in 5 years, I also can create a plan to get me there. And I think it's so funny, interesting working with students because I had this student that I was advising when I was at George Fox. And I was a freshman, one of my freshman advisees, and she came in, and I said, well, what are you thinking you want to do? And I said, she said, I really want to be a pediatrician. I'm like, that's great. I said, we need to get you into some of the science classes. And she said, well, I don't really like science. Disconnect between her. She had it all. She knew exactly. But the pathway was really fuzzy for this particular woman. So we had to work on that a little bit. So it is this ability to say not just this unreasonable goal, but there is a way that I can get to this goal, and they have a way. But then it's also this belief that if I do these things, I'll actually get to the goals. And I think that's what sometimes you find with our first generation students and those kind of things, is that they're toying with these beliefs that they can make it these goals that they're setting, but it's still the belief. Do they still believe? Do they have that kind of growth mindset that they can get to this growth? It's just as critical as having the goal. So it's really those three pieces that go into growth. So one other thing, though, that I think you should understand about goal-directed growth is that there's really two different set of goals that they will come into our classrooms with, right? They will come in with a performance goal or a mastery goal. And a performance goal is really, you know it because the first thing they want to know is how do I make an A in this class, okay? It's kind of that instrumental type of learning. I need to know, understand exactly what you want from me, because what education is about is me trying to figure out what the professor wants and giving it back to him or her in a way that will give me the grade that I want. That's their agenda. The mastery students really are the ones that come in and they're just really interested. They really want to understand. They really want to know. Doesn't mean that they're not necessarily interested in the goal, in the grade, but their inclination more is really around the learning process. Most students have a little bit of a mix of this, but I do have to say that we are conditioning our students through our education system to be performance goal oriented. We test them. There's one right answer. We're really focused on the goals. We're very focused on the goals of getting into higher education, those types of things. So we really condition them. But we know as instructors that when they have these mastery goals, they learn in a different way, don't they? I mean, they learn in a deep way. They retain information in a whole different level. So what we're really trying to do is move toward these mastery goals. But a few years ago, we did this experiment where we had first-year students at APU write their goals and send them to us, 3 goals that they had to do. And you really begin to realize, wow, the lion's share of them are in this quadrant. So part of our goal, part of our essence is trying to say, okay, you're going to have some here, but we also want to stretch you to begin to get you to think about, what do you want to learn here? I used to start my classes with this simple question, what do you want to learn? I taught a leadership class here about 4 years ago. I remember I started with, what do you want to learn? And it was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you want to teach us? That's what I want to learn. It's kind of like this blank square, like, what do you mean? What do I want to learn? I'm paying you. This is crazy, this disconnect. So part of what we're trying to do is say, no, it's got to intersect with what you want to learn, what you need to learn. And then pathways really this is, but one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow, right, in the writing part is scaffolding and breaking down those kind of things, because one of the things I think we really teach well through our assignments is this, even if they can learn how to break down an assignment, you're beginning to teach them the pathways that it takes. All right.
So we want you to do a little exercise that you choose with your students or not, but pretend you are a first-year student. No, you can just be yourselves. Imagine your life 5 years from now, 5 years down the road. First of all, I want you to picture it. If everything worked out exactly the way you wanted, everything worked out in your life the way you wanted, what would your life look like 5 years from now? Take a few minutes, jot it down. What would your life look like if everything went your way? It's not going to happen, but if it worked out exactly the way you wanted, what would you be doing? What would your life look like?
Some higher goals.
This is to inject some humor in the afternoon, right?
I'm just hoping to pass my faith in creation.
The worthy goal.
There was no school.
And the more vividly you can imagine this, the better. You do it every day. Will you try to get your teacher?
No, well, no. I know, I do think so.
I want to help. Yeah.
She's going to name it and claim it.
Yeah.
Or those eyes. And now, if nothing in your life worked out the way you wanted, where would you be 5 years from now? If nothing worked out the way you wanted.
That was easy.
Status quo. And picture that as vividly as you can, what life would be like And so now the next thing is list what you've done this week to get you down the road toward your best possible self. That first scenario. What have you done this week? It's only one day. What have you done this week that gets you down the road to that best possible self? And then the final piece of this is what could you do in the coming week or next week to get further down that road? What are specific actions you could take that would lead you toward that road? Choose to do something like this in class, and this is based on Hazel Marcus's work at Stanford on best possible selves, in which she has been able to demonstrate that when students have a vivid image of this best possible self, it serves as a motivator, but also helps them design some pathways for reaching those goals. She's also found, however, that when students come from very disadvantaged environments, that actually that worst possible self scenario is often more motivating for them. That they'll say, I will end up like, name a family member who is incarcerated or selling crack on the street or did not, maybe had
has 10 children, or 30 or whatever. So they have this pretty vivid image from their own cultural background sometimes that can be just as motivating for them. So that's good to be aware of. If you choose to do this, it could be an individual exercise, a writing exercise. Sarah brought up a good point earlier about, as we ask students to do things in class, being aware of kind of their boundaries and privacy concerns. And even my well-intentioned story of your name example, she said, well, what if someone has a painful story? In other words, they came out of foster care or from an abusive home, or they don't know the origin of their name. So, and I thought thank you for raising that issue, because that's something for us to be aware of. So you may choose to make this a more private exercise for them that helps prepare them for the momentum paper, where we're asking them to set some goals. It's a good way to also say, look at what you're doing right now, because you're already engaged in actions that are heading you down these roads. When I've done it in class, I often will ask them to, if they feel comfortable, to share it with just a partner to whatever extent they want to, and to give each other feedback on, well, is that a realistic goal? Are those some good pathways and strategies for getting there? Here's another pathway. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, it kind of links on directly in though to the give the partner. Were you through with this piece? So just like Laurie said, these weeks in the momentum book are setting up the momentum paper at the end. But how this book is constructed is the very first part of it, chapter 4, is really asking them to look at your life. So that's where we kind of bring in strengths, and we bring in what's their natural inclinations and those types of things. So sometimes we write goals that are disassociated from who we are. So we're getting them to start thinking about that process. And then the next chapter moves into this, thinking about yourself at graduation. Now, what have you been involved in those types of things? So it gets them to start doing it. But what we found with first-year students, because they don't know what they don't know yet, right? They don't know what they could be involved in. They don't know how to even think about their GPA. So it's really ripe with a lot of questions that give them multiple choices, so they can begin to click and think about it. And so that's why that's there. It's really not so much that they get involved in any of these things, but it's back to hope theory, that they're beginning to start thinking about down the road at graduation, looking back, I want this to be this way. So we ask them all sorts of questions, like even what kind of grades do you think? We really try to get them to think about their summer activities and studying abroad and doing some of those things, because we want them from the very beginning to start broadening what they think are their opportunities. And so that's really how the book moves. During week 4, we have the Azusa Ferry. That will not go over well. I keep calling that in your class. Sorry.
Don't even joke,
Tracy, will you
right?
talk
Don't
about
even
that when you do your partner presentation? Okay, so I'm going to let you give the details because I don't want to mess the
And she'll pronounce it correctly 12
embarrass
times.
myself into more than I already have. But it's our major fair. It's a really important part. And the great thing about doing that during this time is it's really getting them to begin to think about their major, the organizations in their departments they could be involved in, and those types of things. So we know that a lot of them have come in and have already checked off the major, but we still know there's a lot of movement in that first year. And so this gives the resources, and I said I wouldn't talk about it than I did. Tracy will tell you much more about this really great, exciting event. Week 5 is really this is where strengths weeks come in. And tomorrow or the next day, Keith has a session on strengths. And so he's going to be explaining what strengths week is better than I possibly could. But one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is to really remind your students this is the week to take the Clifton Strengths Finder. And in the book that they purchased, there is a bookmark that's shrink wrapped onto the top of that book. And on that bookmark is the code that they use to take this. Okay, so that's how they get it. And in the defense of the book, it's also what runs up the cost of the book, because it's a $10 code that goes onto that. But anyway, it is there, and making sure that they have that. If there are any problems with that, the Noel Strengths Academy is the place for their code issues. And then this goes right on down, and then this is, again, the chapter, that 7 is really a chapter that covers the specifics. So that's how we move in these weeks during the community connections.
All right. So now the focus is going to shift a bit to how do we get students psychologically engaged, because we can have them in the room, but we need their psychological engagement in the learning process. And so this is where deep learning comes in. How do I get them to make meaningful connections? How do I get them to process at beyond this surface level of memorizing things? How do I get them to connect to what they're learning in other classes? How do I get them to think about real life and to be energized by the learning process? So thriving students are not just investing the effort, getting good grades, but they are thinking about what they're learning all the time. They're thinking about it outside of class. They're talking about it with their friends. When I was at Wellesley University a couple of years ago, and I was talking to their about to graduate senior leaders, so it was the best Wellesley had to offer. And I had an afternoon with them and was talking about what it meant to thrive on campus and treated it as a focus group. One of the things they said to me is, if we truly engaged in learning, we would never get A's. So we don't do it. And I thought, whoa, tell me more about this. And they said, no, getting an A is about following directions and giving the professor what he or she wants. And if I truly engaged in learning, I might not get my assignment in quite on time. It might not look exactly like what the professor stated was in the syllabus. And so I would get an A- or a B+, and I have to get into the top grad school. I have to get A's in everything. So I choose constantly in every class, engagement or the grade. And I said, well, I'm talking to your faculty tomorrow morning. Can I share this with them? And they said, please do. And so as I shared that information with faculty, they were shocked, of course, and they said, why would they think this? And then they started discussing it at their tables, and they said, oh my goodness, this is how we learn. We are kind of these surface learners, performance goal oriented, and we want, in the name of clarity, and it's important to be clear in your expectations, but they said we realize that a lot of what we do is for our own convenience. You know, I have things due at certain times so that my life is easier. I have them all do it a certain way so that I can grade faster, right? And so they started thinking, what would it look like to actually allow students to engage more deeply in the learning? Now again, these were seniors who had some pretty clear ways that they wanted to pursue their learning that we might not see in first-year students. But I wanted you to be aware that sometimes there is that tension that students feel, that to fully engage in something may mean to sacrifice the grade. So even have conversations about that, of what does it mean to engage in learning in your class, and how much grace is given in meeting your expectations. So one of the things that we do in our doctoral department is, in most of our classes, we give what are called 14 days of grace. And it's a policy that I find works pretty well. Students love it. We just say, we know you may not get things in on time. Here's the due date. But you've got, and you would have to say however many days of grace for the whole semester across all the assignments. And so you determine if you're going to be late, if you're going to be 5 days late on this assignment, well, you only have certain numbers of late days left for all the other assignments. And that way, I'm not keeping track of how many days has it been. It's up to the student. But when they've reached the end of my grace, that's when the grade starts getting done. And I have watched students really step up to higher levels of responsibility, of saying, okay, I know I have some grace on this. They always have to inform me, so it's not just, oh, I haven't gotten it from you. But they always let me know, and so I'll get emails. I'm going to use a day of grace on this project. You'll have it this time tomorrow night or whatever. So as we think about the engaged learning process, now I will say, the reason there is a CAR on this is because it's the acronym that helps me remember what I want to do in every single class period. And that is, we know that what motivates people from the inside out is when their basic needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness are met. So I think of a CAR in every class and say, what am I doing in this class to fuel my students' motivation? What am I doing to convey to them that they can do this? That's the competence. You can do this. what am I doing to give them some choice and some freedom? So that's where, for me, days of grace. Sometimes what I do is to say, you can do your research paper this way or this way. I find with first-year students, it's not, tell me what you want to do, submit a proposal. It's more, you could do it like this or like this, or maybe 3 choices. But giving them some options really helps them take ownership and be more motivated for the class. And then relatedness is, what am I doing every day in class that strengthens the relationships students have with each other and with me? Because students will be motivated to do either what they think they're capable of doing, or what they feel like is important to the people who are important to them. So when you have that sense of community in class, it really builds their sense of, all right, I may not particularly like this assignment, but it's what everybody's doing, we're in this together. So that will help build their motivation considerably. When you think about ways to engage students in class, the more you can use real life examples. So giving them case studies to work with. Problem-based learning would be if you bring a problem and don't give them any solutions, but say, you know what, you've got this week to work on this in your groups, or these 2 weeks. And you go out and search for the information, the solution to this problem. Or team-based learning, which is when students are put in groups. I would say there is an article in iTunes about this. One of the key things about team-based learning, and Sean is one of our resident experts on that, has taught her entire communications classes, that way leadership.
Yep, conflict management. Yep.
Yeah. That way, and has had fantastic success with it that she could share with you. But one of the key things about team-based learning is that students are in teams the whole semester, the same team, because that helps them learn about conflict and how to navigate things. So when I did this with my first year seminar class a number of years ago, I had access to their applications, right? And I created the most diverse teams I could in my class. I had one team that hated each other. They despised each other to the point that they could not get any work done, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible, but I told them, you're in this team for the whole semester. And there was one assignment where they were to work, it was kind of a who gets to survive the nuclear war, kind of thing, nuclear holocaust. And they were given descriptions of all the people who were trying to get into the bomb shelter, and they had to choose who was worthy. And there was something wonderful about each person, but something potentially you might not want that person to live, kind of thing. And so, if you had to choose. Yeah. And so, but their instructions were, you have to reach consensus. Your group has to agree on the ones who get to live. It's not take a vote, it's you have to reach consensus. And we talked about how to do this. Well, this team came up after class and said, we can't. And I said, well, you have to stay at the table because you're going to be doing a presentation next week about how you reach consensus. So meet whatever outside of class you need to do. And I just thought, oh, this is not going to work. Because there was a missionary kid there who'd been all over the world, had very, very open, tolerant, wonderful views. There was a super conservative person, as right-wing a student as I've ever encountered. And then there was someone who was very radical in her feminism and her and very out in her sexual orientation, which really bothered the conservative person. So it was a very dynamic and diverse group. So they had time after class to do this, but they came in the next week. And I said, let me know Sunday night if you haven't been able to do this. And I never heard from them. Monday morning, they came in and they stood up front. And it's like they put their arms around each other and going, what is this? This is a little weird. They said, here's the story of how we learned to live with each other. And they told this story of how much they hated each other at first, but that when they knew they kind of couldn't escape, that they figured, I need to learn something from the other voices in the room. It was one of those times, because we were halfway through the semester, so it was so uncomfortable for weeks on end, and I thought, what have I decided to do? But that's one of the things, if you choose to go with team-based learning, there was so much richness that they gained from navigating the conflict and trying to learn from people very, very different from themselves, that it might be worth thinking about. So Eileen, tell us about our new students. And
Okay, so this is our last poll. Some of you are cheering. My favorite. What reason for going to college is most important to APU students? To get training for a specific career, A, to learn more about things that interest me, B, to be able to get a better job, or to gain a general education and appreciation of ideas. Well, this is certainly the national norm at APU, much to my pleasure, to learn more about things that interest me.
Wow.
Now it's close. Don't go crazy on me, all right? They want a job, and their parents want a job, right? But when you compare it, when you look at other universities and other schools across the country, to get a job, prepare for a career, it's really high. But we always look at that and we say, well, that's what they're here for. But actually, their desire to learn about things that interest them, and their desire to understand about big ideas, appreciation of big ideas and those kind of things, let's don't be deceived by a lot of the rhetoric that we hear about the only reason they're coming to college now is to get a job. I think at the end of the day, people are in college because they want to learn, they want to be invigorated, they want to be challenged. And that's why I think this chapter is my favorite, because it's about curiosity and building this and developing it. And it's under this idea of academic entrepreneur, because the students have been told, and I even hear us give this message in some of the things we do, think of it as your job, right? You're going to go to your job, and then you've got to work so many hours to get the grade. And I say, no, think of it as your business. You're creating this, okay? This isn't about just showing up where someone tells you to show up. This is your life for these 4 years. You make it into something that's really interesting and special that flows with you. Take some electives in areas that you didn't think you could. And the reason this is so important to me is really because of this study that I did about 7 years ago, I guess it is now. When I started looking at research in higher education, one of the things that's really stunning is we have studied at-risk and low-achieving students until the blue in the face. A lot of research around them. There was no national study on high-achieving college students. So we're talking about student success, but we had no way of saying, oh, this is success. This is what we want to move to. So we decided, okay, how would we do this? And we agonized over it because success at APU is very different than success at Yale, right? And how do we do this? So we actually used the Truman Scholars, which is a national award that's given to students who have high GPAs, but they also have done a significant act of public service, because we weren't just looking at kind of the egghead, so to speak. We wanted to look at those students who were bright and engaged in the classroom, but were also doing something really special outside the classroom. I mean, these students were like creating, micro businesses in Africa and improving water supplies and creating reading programs in the inner city. I mean, these were significant acts of public service. Anyway, 2 from every state in the union, so there were 100 scholars. We gave them some quantitative studies, and then we interviewed all of them, because they come together in Washington, D.C., and we interviewed them. And what we found in our quantitative is we gave them an assessment of character strengths, and we found that their highest character strength, and the one that made them most different from the general student population, curiosity, off the chart. In fact, we couldn't even get through interviews with them because they kept asking us questions back. You know, like, well, that's interesting. Now, how about you? Blah, blah, blah. We're like, you ask the question and you're like, no, I'm just wondering why you're asking that question. Let's answer the question. I gotta transcribe all this, okay? No, but it was fascinating because they were just so interested, and I started thinking, isn't that true in our classes when we have one of those classes where there's this curiosity that's happening in class, and there's this palpable energy in the room, and you leave and you think, just like Eric Little, I feel God's pleasure when I teach. After you get through with that type of thing, and when you start drilling back and you start really understanding it, it's this engagement that we're looking for as faculty. I mean, it's this kind of energy that happens in the room. So how do we go about doing that? Because some people would say, well, fixed mindset. You're either born curious or you're not, right? Well, we do know in curiosity that, and you folks that have children know this, that some of them come out of the womb very curious and some of them a little more cautious, right? But the thing you need to know about curiosity is that wherever you are on that, there's room for growth, okay? So you might have a set point, but it's always malleable. So even if you don't tend to be particularly inclined toward questions, you can be taught to question, and it's malleable. And we also find that 10% of the variance in academic learning performance is curiosity. It makes a huge deal of difference. If we can improve their curiosity in FYS, it will change their trajectory at APU. It changes their emotional intelligence. It improves their intrinsic motivation. I forgot to add the, sorry about that. There should be a name there. It drives critical thinking. So, you know, Mark Stanton last year was talking about critical thinking. I sent him an email. I said, you got to have curiosity before you have critical thinking. He's like, no, be quiet. Kind of, but not really. A lot like that. It can come out as well. But anyway, but I really do. I think we got to get them interested. Otherwise, critical thinking kind of becomes just argumentation and not kind of the love of what they're learning, and it improves relationships. So one of the things we know is that actually your level of curiosity predicts marital satisfaction more than your personality compatibility, right? And I think, oh yeah, I get that, because you know, people I've been friends with for a long time will go to dinner and we'll just sit there. Like, we've run out of questions for each other. We've run out of that kind of curiosity, and those relationships that can keep that kind of interest going seem to improve the relationship. So what I'd like for us to do is to think a little bit about in our own experience. And I'd like for you to think about a class that you've taken that was really interesting. So something that kind of comes to your mind really fast. Think about that. Get that in your mind. And then what were the specific characteristics of that class? And so what I'd like you to do at each one of your tables is to come up with 3 specific characteristics of the class that really evoked your interest. All right, so what was that class like? All right, so let's take a few minutes to think that.
I'm not. And I just thought, I feel like some of those next printing. So they went with this Cornell one. It's actually pretty similar to that. But I just don't think anyone's going to own printing it because they just decided because under my session, technically, we already printed all of our stuff. I just emailed her earlier. Just so you let me know? Yeah. If you need me to do it, let me know. Okay. But I was trying not to give you guys tasks like that. If you need to do it, just let me know. Could you let me know by 5? Well, I mean, I wrote her in that session because I was like, it's harder than we print. Yeah. So we let me know, and then I'll make sure you have it. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. And I could print it in leadership. I could send it to Lily right now and go grab it. You know, she's been printing stuff for me. That would be monsters. It'll make my stomach hurt. Yeah, don't let me give you anything to make your stomach hurt. But I just was wondering if they sent it to you or something. Well, I do have it. And we uploaded it in the course. Okay, you did. That's what I was going to check too. Okay. We did. So I'll print it in the course because we aren't going to put it in our slide. It's kind of ugly to just make one make it pretty, or have it make it pretty, or whatever you think. Yeah. I'll send you I have a book together for the reach tomorrow. Can I do that right after? It's not the one that's uploaded. It is, but we have a rare copy too. Yes. Okay? Yeah. Well, we're going to, you're going to be here at the end of the day at 4:15. When we do round up, because we're going to be saying, here's some things we need to do tomorrow, and that's the appropriate time. It might be less, there'll be more engagement. We're not meeting really. Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. But you're going to go through the timeline and just make it really straightforward. Yeah. Her name on My husband just bought me a cello for my birthday.
Oh wow, really? Did you grow up playing?
I've never played an instrument.
Wow.
I played guitar a little bit in undergrad. Lifelong goal. It's a lifelong dream of mine, and he decided, I think my PhD, he decided to empower me by publishing a student work.
Oh, good.
So, and I don't think it's a part of it because I didn't know how to do it for different reasons.
You have to be really patient.
That's what I figured. It's good for me. My teaching philosophy and always been learning something hard, so I'm more sympathetic to my students. But my heart though, when I saw you stand up, you gotta go. But nice.
I saw the iPads with
Drawn to the high.
exactly. Yeah, even because you have to train your muscles. So holding the bow, that's actually what my seminar is about. It's about training mindset, psychology. I'm going to teach now until 8:30. So I have a lot of young students.
I'm excited to try it. It's my big life challenge.
Yeah, good luck.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so for the, obviously, information literacy is the anti-bibliography, right? And with that, it's very general. So, what about this? Early draft, we'll be talking more about global, so audience message
All right, let's take this.
critical thinking. But it's more important, right? So in draft one, you might mention who's talking about it. You might also mention message, purpose, and then maybe that's it. Maybe draft two is organization, evidence. No, draft two is organization, support, analysis.
I moved it up to the research proposal.
Organization would be draft one. Sorry, evidence and analysis. Good. So obviously,
Back there. What I want to be able to do is point out that all of these things are opportunities to course correct.
You got specific
I do them like
organization, but maybe there you might want to address draft one. Have you thought about multiple perspectives?
Like you were talking earlier, you know, what don't you want to happen? Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we share across the groups? Because Laurie actually went to an education system that taught her how to spell, she will be writing my unfortunate educational background. So, how about you guys? What do you have? We have a good one. You have a good one, okay. All right.
One is that it's experiential,
Experiential, okay?
not just talking in theory, but in practice. So there's a way to capture and for students to experience the activity.
Do it.
All the more meaningful. That was one.
You're not taking the hint.
Well, the other one is that grades were not a factor. It's exactly what you were talking about. Is there a way that you can have a class? One example was everyone gets an A, or it's a passing pass, so you can focus just on the learning. And we'll come back to that one as a question or a request for FYS.
And vulnerability, the excitement around it.
Vulnerability. It reminds me of when I taught this, not at this university, but at FYS class before, and I had in the syllabus that 10% of the grade was a wild card, so they could decide what they wanted to learn. And we spent literally 30 minutes with them, like, what do you mean? Oh yeah. Like, well, how are you going to grade that? Well, okay, so like, do you have a rubric? I mean, how do we know? What did they do last year? Okay, I mean, now, like, who got the A last? I'm like, okay, never mind. I just tell them. It's exhausting. But I realized now that we've conditioned them to where it's really hard for them to think about what they want to learn. So, yeah.
And I think you said your professors like passionate and excited about the topic.
The passion. Okay, great, thanks. How about you guys?
We had a couple of overlaps. So
Okay.
the professor's passion, definitely. That it's grounded in the practical application, so experiential would probably fall under that. That the course was difficult or challenging, so that the professor was willing to push and not do things too easily. And then also that perspectives were changed, so that it helped us to see something in a different way that we wouldn't normally have considered.
Yeah, okay. Kind of class that makes your head hurt, but you're really thankful for it. Yeah. Okay, great. How about you guys? Brian, did you take them off a cliff or?
Yeah.
Okay. What? No, he said it, not me. I didn't. How about you guys? What do you have?
Well, I think most of the positive ones, we spent a little more time on how we learned what not to do. But that, I didn't graduate undergrad till I was 34, which says a lot more about what experience I had than the rest of the room. I mean, and I dropped out. I'm the poster child for what not to be done to, and so I appreciate when a professor polarizes a room and basically puts the students' walls up from the very, very beginning. And so how do I avoid that?
Yeah, that relatedness. Great. Okay. How about you guys?
We had several things that have been mentioned here. A professor that valued you as a person, as a student. Another thing that was mentioned was, trying to combine two here, creativity, trying a variety of styles, and within that, giving you the ability to fail, right? And move on. And then, professors that pose the big questions, the big picture, that make you really think beyond the levels of the fact.
Great. Good. How about you guys in that?
Well, I learned something from both of them, and then it was cool how it just, exploded into new knowledge. How's that?
Learning in the back.
Yes.
All right.
So Sarah was talking about a Japanese literature course where she read Japanese novels that were really uncomfortable, and they just weren't, they challenged all of her expectations about what a good novel should be, and that the professor was able to take that challenge and that discomfort with learning this odd style and allow them to sit in that space and help them to wrestle with that. The teacher intentionally planned for that and gave them the space to be in that place of discomfort. And then Scott had shared something that in the beginning of a book at one point, the person had written in the introduction, if this is your first time to read this, I'm really jealous, or something like that. And he said that someone who teaches his excitement or with excitement as the students and the professor journey together toward learning, that was what was best for him. So it just said that it reminded me of Bruthy's research on a learning community where faculty have this one body of knowledge or language, and students come in with that, and they meet, they collide, and that explosive place where they collide is where new knowledge is formed. That's learning. So that was what they both described.
Great. Thanks. How about you guys?
Well, we had one course where the instructor was really engaging and exciting to watch, although it was just lecture, but had a really good relationship with the students. Another one was hands-on participation, doing physics and relating it to the real world. And a third was APU's English department, challenging students but with difficult things, but supporting them and saying they could succeed and relating it, making it relatable to their own lives.
Great. All right, we're going to leave this up for a second because we're going to come back to this. But let me show you a little bit about what they have found on what makes something interesting. And so curiosity and interest are used synonymously in the psychological research around us. So when I use them, I'll use them interchangeably. But it raises this question, what makes something interesting? So I'm going to talk about Berline's work, which is slightly dated, but not too much, because it's been replicated. But he says there are 4 variables to make something interesting. Primarily talking about a text, but it also has some transparency to the classroom. First one is novelty. It actually makes something interesting. And we kind of talked a little bit about this, even with the creativity. There's introducing a novelty. So I know when I was teaching this one class, I remember it so vividly because I got into this rhythm where we would come in and we'd spend the first 5 to 10 minutes talking about, the text or what they learned or something that they'd taken from the last class. And then I would turn the PowerPoint on and I'd start. And every time I turned the PowerPoint on, and it got more pronounced as I went through the semester, you could feel the energy leaving from the room. The minute I turned it on, it was like all of a sudden the light in their eyes kind of went to the screen, down to their thing, and it just started. And one day I finally said, wait a minute, what just happened when I turned on the PowerPoint? It's like you guys, the light bulb went off. And they're like, well, you told us when you turned that on, it said, you were through listening to us, and we were supposed to listen to you now. And I was like, oh, wow, that is so not what I was trying to do. And so then I started saying, all right, every day we're going to mix it up. I mean, sometimes we sat in a circle, sometimes we sat. If you were there that day, or Jeff, if you were in that class, so I taught this leadership class one time, and I know this is far out, and I wouldn't suggest you do this, all right? But we were having this conversation, and I was just having a kind of a difficult time getting the much energy in the class, and we were talking about positionality or something like that. I said, all right, everyone stand up, go around, and we're going to sit on the ground, okay, in the class. Now, I wouldn't suggest you do this if you're my age, because getting up is really problematic. After about 10 minutes, I had a really hard time. It was ugly. But sitting on the floor, and I know that sounds kind of radical, it changed the class. I mean, people who never taught before, and I couldn't quite get it. I'm like, just sitting on the floor made that much difference. And so I'm not suggesting we sit on the floor, but even changing, I love to do the thing where if they're in rows, just take one day where you make them get up and everyone on the front row moves to the back and everyone on the back row moves to the front. It really kind of just, it messes with their mind because they're used to their position in the class and those kind of things. But this idea of novelty is also the novelty of the information, because what we've learned is that even though it might be relevant, like you go to a session at a conference and it's relevant to you, if you know it, it's not as interesting, right? So it's relevant, but there's also a newness to it. And so Laurie was talking earlier about, making sure the classes have that kind of complexity to it, that you're introducing these new ideas as you go along. The second one is actually uncertainty. Make something more interesting. So once you know something, you're actually less curious or interested in it. Now, you also have a positive energy plus that goes into you build an expertise, and so it's not all bad that you know it, but actually it's the uncertainty. So it's the going into the class, and it's kind of the challenging the perspectives. The piece what we were talking about, where all of a sudden you're introducing a new idea, and I'm not exactly sure where I stand anymore. I mean, I thought I understood where I stand, but now I'm a little uncertain, and I'm not exactly. So they did this study one time where they introduced uncertainty into a text. So they had one text, and it was, here's the study, yada, yada, yada. The other text, it said, some people think this could be. And all they did was change the language to be a little bit more conditional in it. And they found that the students not only remembered the information more in that text, but they were able to use it to problem solve in more effective ways with it. So there was something about saying, it could be this, it could be that. Now we also know as freshmen that there's a lot of uncertainty already. So we're trying to balance that out. If you introduce way too much uncertainty the very first week or 2 weeks, you know, you might find some coming to Katie for a change in class or something like that. It might be an overload. But I do think that helping our students to be more okay with uncertainty, because they have been trained into finding the one right answer, right? And so being able to say, maybe there's not one right answer to this. How would you feel about that? Conflict actually does, makes it more interesting. So I now know why we are interested in those TV shows where someone's voted off, right? I mean, we're like, conflict hasn't conflict, you know, those kind of things. But it's actually, I find the conflicting ideas, like, you know, when a class has got a lot of energy, when two of the students start disagreeing with each other, and there's this kind of great back and forth and those types of things that we're doing it. Now we also know that if it's too conflictual, there'll be people with the strength of harmony that will get really stressed out about too much conflict, and so you're going to have to resolve some of it for them, because harmony is always very high in the APU strength set of our students. So you have to be kind of careful about that. But if there's not some conflict, whether it's a conflict between each other, a conflict of ideas, a conflict of their own perspective, but that's what makes something interesting, and easing them into that conflict and making it okay to conflict. And then we talked about complexity, but what's interesting is complexity is on this continuum, that if there's not enough complexity, like Laurie was talking about, it's not as interesting. If it's too easy, it's just not as interesting. But if it is too complex, so it's something that they absolutely cannot understand or attain to, they actually lose interest in that as well. The struggle for you is that on this continuum, they're all in different places, right? And so you're trying to figure out how to make the complexity enter the complexity. But in terms of curiosity and interest, if you're going to shy in one way, shy toward greater levels of curiosity, toward greater levels of complexity. Because, like we're saying, in the growth mindset, they will move toward that, and they will go toward the bar that you set. But that kind of complexity is that. So then when you go back and you begin to look at this, you begin to understand challenging. Yeah, it's the complexity piece. I mean, it matches there exactly. I think even the creativity and safe to fail, those kind of things, you begin to see how it works, but then there are a lot of other factors that go into making a class interesting besides just that piece. So let me tell you just quickly how we actually define curiosity, and it has two pieces to it. The first part is actively seeking opportunities for new information. So we know it's that student that's curious because they are the ones who come back to your class the next time and say, you know, I was Googling that, or, you know, I looked up something else, or I did this, and they went and they tried to get new information. You know, sometimes it's the one that you love, hate in your class who's Googling as you're speaking and correcting you with the latest data, you know, but they're also like really engaged and curious, right, because they're going after it. But then it's also this willingness to embrace the novel, the uncertain, and the unpredictable nature of life. And so I'm always telling people, this is about the awe and the wonder and the mystery of God. You know, this is why I think there is a mystery to God, is that it's okay to move into this unpredictable part of life. That's exactly what faith is, you know, is that we're moving into these areas where we can't exactly see it, but we're okay with that. And you know what's interesting, in these high-achieving college students, we heard things like a very high percentage of them had double majors. And I think almost all but two had at least a major and a minor. And they would have double majors like physics and dance, right? And I remember this one person in particular I was talking to, and I'm like, physics and dance? And I said, wow, that's like, there's not even any core courses, you know, that overlap. And she's like, yeah, no, it took me an extra semester. She said, and I knew I wasn't going to be the best physicist, and I probably wasn't going to be the best dancer. She said, but I was going to have this breadth and this understanding. Then that's what I really wanted, I really wanted to be able to understand in kind of broad and interesting ways how these things work together. And so she had moved away from this performance mentality, you know, like, I'm not going to make the A in the class, I'm not going to have the highest grade, and I'm good with that, right? Because I'm really interested in learning how this to do. So I always am agonizing over this. How do we do this for our students, you know? Because I think we do I think our passion does. You know, one of the things we're working on a study right now that actually shows what it is in the classroom that helps promote higher levels of curiosity. And so we're early on into it, but we're beginning to see all sorts of these kind of things.
But here's what we know, just like in growth and fixed mindset. Your level of curiosity is viral. So if you're highly curious about something, they actually become highly curious about it, even when they don't know that they would be. So you hear statements all the time like, I went into the class and I was really dreading it, but the faculty member was so interested in it and so passionate about it and so learning themselves that I became more interested in learning and passionate about it. So yeah.
It strikes me, Alex, like since you were nervous earlier, these students are going to be in our classroom and they don't want to be there. Oh, not really. Oh, okay. I misread you entirely.
But it is that though, yeah.
I think this is what the first year seminar,
We do too.
these kind of mystery themes, I think this is what is possible.
I do too.
Stretching them incredibly.
I do too. And I think, wow, if this seminar could move the notch just a little bit on curiosity in our students, what a difference it would make in the overall academic. So I will tell you this, that one of the things that we highlight in this chapter in the Momentum's book is asking questions. And so we know that students have higher levels of curiosity, ask more questions. And so basically what we're trying to teach in that chapter is to ask questions. Like read your textbook and don't just take it in, but ask a question of your textbook. In fact, you should be reading your textbook with a pen out and asking questions as you move forward. But I don't know about you, but I think we have to teach students really how to ask questions again. I mean, I keep saying we taught them how to do the answers, but now we have to teach them really how to ask the question and how do they know what questions. And so someone earlier had said something about the great questions, raising these kind of big questions. And that's what we know from Ken Bain's work, that the best college professors are the ones that are always addressing the big questions in their field. So it's kind of back to you and to your court is what is the big question your class is addressing? What is the big thing that you're going to be asking and wanting them to explore? Yeah?
Is that something that we can incorporate into the Twitter and Instagram?
That'd be great. That would be great. Constantly questions, Yeah. Yeah, and so we even had talked to, we had some ideas about maybe even talking to chapel programs and all sorts of different ways to kind of permission people. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions of your faith and of your professor and of yourself and of your parents, but we've got to get into this mindset of doing this because, and then I will go on because I know you're sitting up in your chair wanting to give them a break, but I say, no break for you people. Okay, so this one I think is fascinating, though, is that I don't get real good teaching evaluations, okay? So let's just put that on record right now, okay? So
Children using the strengths, I think this is fascinating. This is their age from 1 to 18. So when you look at it, writing, okay, they first start out, they move it, then they get to the 13 or 14, 15, they kind of start leveling out with that piece. Then you see the same way with reading, they begin to read at the same time and they level out a little bit with this. Asking questions, those of you who have a 1, 2, and 3-year-old, you know this. I was sitting and playing in front of a 2-year-old the other day, and I wanted to say, just because. Seriously, my headphones.
No, I think, what if it's run out of that word? Yeah. So it's like 0.
Ouch, right? The thing we know is that the longer you're in public school, the less curious you become. And I'm not trying to criticize public school. They do a good job the best they can. But the reality of it is that they're not geared toward increasing question asking, and they're not geared toward increasing curiosity. So this is what shows up on our doorstep. So this is our great challenge. It's our great blessing, right? Because we get to take it and change that trend.
We get to take them and say, no, we're going to make this line go the different direction. And we're going to teach you how to ask questions again, and we're going to refuel that childlike, curiosity about why things are the way they are. And I happen to think, and then I'll finish, and I happen to think the safe to fail is a really key part of that, because asking questions is a risky business, right? Because you don't know, you state your uncertainty, those kind of things. And I think our ability to show them our own failures is really key in this. Like I did this thing in my doctoral class last time we met, and I thought this is creative, this is a great, that thing bombed so bad. It was like a 2-hour experience. And the longer, it just got worse and worse and worse. And finally we took a break and they came back and I was just laughing. I said, wow, that just totally didn't work. I mean, here's what I was trying to teach and it kind of went off on this and we had a great laugh. And it changed the conversation after this because they realized okay, it's okay not to know. It's okay to try things and to fail. It's okay to do that. So even our own ability to be authentic and fail in front of them will increase their curiosity and their willingness to do it. Okay, so just the end of this, chapter 6 is week 8. That's the it's also Global Engagement Week on campus. It's not a required event for us to do. It's not a, sanctioned kind of thing. But I think it's one of those things that if we can get students to begin to say, maybe I'll go be involved globally. Maybe it'll take that risk. It'll push out their interest. One of the things we found in one of the interviews that we did with students is this one student at APU said, yeah, I was majoring in youth ministry, and I went on this Cambodia trip, and I came back and changed my major to journalism because I wanted to tell their stories. I wanted to give them voice. And she said, it's changed my whole academic. She goes, I sit in the front, I do all the assignments because now I get this sense of I'm going to have to tell their stories, so I better know this, right? So our ability to get them out of this bubble and into global engagement, I think, is a heart of curiosity.
Okay, so we are going to take a break.